Hey everyone, and welcome to another Yogi Misfit Sessions. My name is Danny Pomploon, and I'm your host. Today's episode is book club episode number 2. I've been really pumped to start this book club with everyone. It's been a nice way to, 1, keep myself accountable, if I'm being honest and slightly selfish. But 2, it's been a great way to share some of my favorites, revisit some new books, or rather some old books that I haven't seen in a while, and also take in some really cool suggestions. The way we're running the book club is we do about a book every 4 weeks, and then afterwards we have a live Q&A where we get to discuss as a community. So if you missed out on the last live Q&A, no worries. We've got another one coming up. So for today's book club episode, we talk about Don Ruiz's we talk about Don Miguel Ruiz's book, The 4 Agreements. I have not read this one in such a long time, and it was such a pleasure to just revisit it and be able to check it out.
Make sure you check out Amy McDonald's awesome Grow Your Business course. It's a 6-month program developed specifically for yoga teachers by Amy, who's an amazing yoga business coach. I've known Amy for quite a while now, and I really value her integrity and the content that she's put together for this course. She knows exactly what it is to be a yoga teacher, 1, but also how to make this your main source of income. Growing your yoga business is designed to help take people to the next level in their teaching. So whether you're trying to become a teacher trainer, or maybe you're a yoga hobbyist right now and you want to turn this into an abundant yoga business, this program is composed of 8 different modules. You get to work with some live calls with Amy, you get some workbook stuff, and you get to cover the whole gamut of marketing and how to just put everything together step by step. This business also talks about different pricing and brand etiquette and just really how to get your project started. When you sign up for this course, let Amy know that I sent you, and you'll receive a whole lot of goodies. Plus, you'll receive $100 off the course and my arm balance video series, and Amy will include a free Facebook ad training. That's a whole lot of goodies. If you pay the course in full, use the coupon code DANNYFULLPAY, that's DANNIFULL PAY, to receive these goodies. Or if you opt for the payment plan, use the payment code DANNYPAYMENTPLAN, that's Danny Payment Plan. I've included a link to the course in the show notes so that you can discover more about the program and see how you can utilize it to improve your yoga business.
Today's book club is on The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. And I have to tell you guys, if you haven't picked this one up yet, you must. It is an absolute great read. So his book was written in 1997 and ended up spending 8 years on the New York Times bestseller list. It sold over 6 million copies. And it's based on these 4 guiding principles. So the first principle is be impeccable on your word. The second one is don't take anything personally. The third one is don't make any assumptions. And the fourth one is always do your best. And I cannot tell you guys why I think that these principles are so important to live your life by. He ends up breaking it down step by step. He talks about how, when we were younger, we were pretty much domesticated and we didn't get to choose our own selves. We were kind of brought up around, our parents and things around us. And what people say about us isn't really a direct reflection. And if we keep listening to what people say about us and let it charge our emotions, that people have control over us. And then he talks about there are ways to break our old habits or our old agreements and set new ones so that we can live a more freeing and better life, so to speak. So the first lesson is, when we were younger, we had a lot of impact because people had a lot more control over us rather than us having ever control of ourselves. So to dive a little more into lesson 1, which is our environment domesticates us from childhood and it leads us to living an unreflected life. And so he talks about there's a lot of elements in our lives that we don't get to choose or have control over. And he calls them the sum of domestication. And it's a process that starts the day you were born, basically. So you don't get to pick your first language, you don't get to pick the first school that you go to, and you can't control what attitudes your parents instill in you. You have to kind of just sit back. And it's a sum of like parents, peers, teachers, religion, and all these influence that instill these sets of rules on us. And as children, we have no real power over them. We get rewarded when we do good and punished when we step out of line. So if you add this up over and over and over, decades and decades and decades, you become someone who's chasing brownie points, afraid of rejection, and not questioning society's rules. And the worst thing about this collective dream is it's eventually, we're so domesticated that we continue to do it to ourselves. So if you've ever broken a rule like missing a deadline and then mentally punishing yourself, or like judging or blaming yourself, you've seen this problem in action. So how do you break this cycle? With a set of new agreements. And then he starts to dive into lesson number 2, which is nothing people say or do is personal, but you need to know who you are to be okay with that. And one of these new internal rules you should try to adopt is by never taking anything personal. It's the second of 4 agreements, and it's believed to be the most powerful one. I recently explained it to a friend over dinner. Nothing, absolutely nothing that other people in the world say to you is about you. When someone calls you ugly, it's a whole lot more about them than it is about you. Whatever issues they're dealing with has led them to take this further frustration out on you rather than it being about you itself, which is kind of a really tough pill to swallow. And this is one of the ones that I had a really, really, really hard time with. But whether it's true or not, when you take it personally, you have to acknowledge that it means, to some extent, you believe it. And you should never, ever, ever take anything personal. But not taking hurtful comments and setbacks personal is hard. It's extremely hard. And so according to Ruiz, the only way to make this habit, to break this habit, is to become very, very, very self-aware. So really knowing who you are. Know deep, deep, deep down inside who you are, and what your truth is, and what your good allows you to, and that your good allows you to stop seeking validation and acceptance. And not only just knowing who you are, but knowing your truth, knowing what your good is, and that should allow you to stop seeking validation and acceptance from everybody else. So we dive into lesson 3. And lesson 3 is it's a way to break down old agreements and free yourself so that you can come up with some of your own. So at this point, we start to realize how important it is to free ourselves from our old ones and maybe create some new ones. And so Ruiz suggests that there's 3 ways to do it. One is to start noticing the beliefs that you have, which are based on fear and make you unhappy. And we all have them. Our attention has been turned towards them since we were little children. And we could have done nothing about developing them, but it's time to grow and pick them apart, which is really hard because that means it's time for some self-realization. Number 2, learn to forgive the people around who hurt you, most of all yourself. When he talks about the Toltec wisdom, it's called a parasite of the mind. A fight, a missed bus, a spilled glass of milk, whatever causes negative emotions can lead into a downward spiral and ruin your day, unless you forgive yourself and everyone involved. And this is the only thing that lets you move on instantly. And the third one, he says, remember that each day could be your last, so stay in the present. The onset, or the thought of, the death, right? It brings clarity. So it makes you ask, how do you want to live? And do you really want to let the opinions of others decide what you want to do right now? All these in general will take a lot of time. It takes a lot of practice and finding out who you are and make these new rules work for you. It's a lot of work. It's not easy enough to just, blab these out there and say, let's go for it. And these all take time, repeated practice, and finding out how you can make them work for you. But it's a great starting point to untangle the mess in your mind and finally start living by your own agreements. I cannot recommend this book enough. This is my 3rd read through it, and even the 3rd time, it was such a joy and such a reminder. So I hope you guys enjoyed the summary, and without further ado, here goes the live Q&A on the 4 agreements. All right, guys. So welcome to the Q&A and comment section for the book, The Four Agreements that we are talking about in Book Club episode 2. So I guess I want to start with, this anybody's first time reading this book, or second round or third round, or is this the first time for everybody?
This was my second round.
Second round. Okay. So for those of you that read it for the first time, what was your biggest takeaway on the example? I guess when he first starts to break down about how these rules are really like instilled in us, and how these different thoughts, when we're kids, and how our parents kind of shape us and form us into thinking certain ways, like, what was your biggest takeaway on that? Did you at all reflect on, like, oh my God, this is how I react in the world because of this stuff?
It made me think of sales. Like when you're exposed to information and you're taking it in, it's like people just want to get your ear, and that's really powerful.
I thought it was so interesting how, like, it's almost like these filters are installed, and by parents, by everyone, the whole little culture we grow up in, how they install these filters and we don't even know they're getting installed. I found that I had never thought of that before.
We also don't even have the opportunity to, like, say no to some of those filters and to some of those thoughts that are being installed, because we're so young at that point that that sense of our will, and also that point of our mental processes just aren't there yet. When I started to dive into the book, one of the major notes that I took was, like, not to make it's really hard because we hear this all the time, but, like, the saying that it's, what anyone else thinks about you is absolutely none of your business. And it's a really tough pill to swallow when you think about it in whole. But the truth is, like, the things that people are doing to you are all because of their past and their beliefs and their judgments. And really, it doesn't boil down to any of the things that that we've necessarily done to have that put against us. But for me, like, it's, I guess maybe it's the Leo in me or the fire side of me. I'm always like, well, they did this. You want to kind of, as opposed to taking responsibility for your own actions and for ourselves, we kind of want to take somebody else down with us. Does that make sense to anybody?
Absolutely.
Robin, how did you feel about that part when it said, like, you cannot take what everyone does to you personally?
Well, it really, on the surface of things, makes a lot of sense. It's harder to play that out in the moment,
Right.
but completely sensible. And I really appreciated how they talked about it keeps you able to be in complete hell, I think is how they put it.
Yeah.
And be okay, right?
Yeah.
Like, when you're able to keep that agreement. So it's a huge gift. And I've noticed myself starting to pay attention to it, particularly since reading that chapter. But yeah, it's so much harder because it's so ingrained, So I think just with that small amount of additional awareness, I brought more and more attention to my reaction and making a commitment to stay out of that assumption. So
yeah, totally. Yeah. So how do you then find, like, what do you then do to try to instill this stuff in your life, right? Like we would in, let's say, a yoga practice, right? Let's say the action of, like, trying to bring in the yamas or the niyamas in your life, right? We'll just pick one of them, just like self-study. Like, we do these things to actually reinforce what we're doing in a practice. How do we then take this part from, this small little part from this teeny tiny little 180 something page book and try to, like, ingrain it in ourselves?
Practice.
Yeah.
Make sure you think about it every day.
Absolutely. Did anyone find that agreement was somewhat similar to part of our yoga practice?
100%.
In what regard?
I mean, if I don't go every day, I'm, to my yoga practice, or do something every day within my yoga practice, then of course I'm tighter, my back hurts, or I forget.
Right.
And, sometimes they say it's like riding a bike, but with this stuff, It's just we've been out of practice and had these bad habits drilled into us just within our family and society as it is. So it's just something we do habitually.
Yeah. I'd agree. Anybody else like on how to like how it resembled for me? I mean, I couldn't agree with more what Jenny just said, but if you don't actually what I love about these books, you know, whether it's this book or even the last book that we read for book club, is that you could easily read this stuff and be like, oh, that's a really cool concept. But if you're not actually instilling these concepts in or finding a way to integrate this stuff in your life, it's I want to call it maybe spiritual bypass, or the self-help person the self-help person that's just more like speaking your truth, and they say the things but they don't actually do the things to reinforce the thing.
Yeah, it gives you really good ammo to tell other people what they're doing.
Yeah, totally.
Right.
Totally. Josh, what do you do personally, like when you read something like this and you're like, I want to, like, I don't know, take this, maybe the not taking it personally part, or the being impeccable in your word, or, you know, the other one that I'm going to get to in a second, which I'm probably going to lose it a little bit, was the don't make assumptions thing.
I mean, yeah, I do some practices, authentic relating practices like circling and T group, that I find help me. It's kind of like a interpersonal meditation, so you can get aware of spoiler alert, assumptions that you're making, or things that you're taking personally, and you can kind of like be like aware of it, because the whole practice is about kind of hearing other people's perceptions, other people's stories, and being like, okay, that's their story, I have my story.
Right. At the end of it, we're all kind of in our own little universe as well. So this is one of the points that I actually, as I'm looking at my notes, I put like 3 stars on this, but the one he talks about in the book, he says, don't make assumptions about what other people are thinking, but also, like projecting our own beliefs onto others. And then what else did I write down here? Oh yeah, this leads to an argument that doesn't need to happen in the first place. And it's like, stop assuming you know and ask instead. And what I find myself as being maybe a little more of a charger kind of personality, like I almost don't give people the benefit of the doubt if they're not moving at my same speed. So I end up making that assumption because they're not moving as quickly. And it kind of, for me, it went back to the part where like being impeccable with my word. Part of my word is being more patient with people. Like being a yoga practitioner, one of the things that I focus on is being patient with myself and being patient, you know, with all the things that I do. And yet I go back against it, like consistently day to day. I'm totally like throwing out like insecurities here, but consistently go back against it when it comes to not making assumptions, because I tend to move so quick because I bypass the whole being patient part. Did anyone else, I don't know, for me anyway, did anyone else dive into this part of not making assumptions?
For me, it was one of the ones that hit hard because I do it all the time.
Yeah.
And I'm constantly now, ever since then, having to remind myself that most of the time when you make the assumption, well, maybe not most of the time, but some of the time when you're making an assumption, you're wrong. Yeah. Or at least partly wrong.
Oh yeah,
you don't know the backstory or that person's story at all. So
yeah.
I think that it's an easier way to live, but it's hard. It's a hard habit to break.
Yeah, it's a really hard practice, and I mean, what's that old saying? It's like assuming only makes an ass out of you and me, or something. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love the next part too that came in the book, which is just pretty much just like always do your best. It's not just like a really simple agreement, but just like an easy mantra. And I also, this is something that I thought a little more yogically about, like for me, when we, as a teacher and even as a practitioner on both accounts, we all see it. There are those people that come to class and they want to win first place, right? They're like, they're ready to get first place in yoga that day, you know, and you can see them pushing themselves. So like, just like, the person next to me is doing this and I got to do that. And like we would in any practice, and like we would in yoga, not even just in the physical part, but what the practice teaches us is there is no first and there is no last. It's really just showing up.
exactly as you are and doing the best with what you have that day. And I think that's important. And in this point is that it's always doing your best, but doing your best with what you have. Does that make sense? So not trying to make this false assumption or build this false narrative that your best is all the way up here when you don't have that in you, or when that's not where your capabilities for that best may not be today. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I mean, because it changes. Like I think it even says this in the book, that changes every day.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. But we forget that, because then we stick to this one thing, and then I don't know, for me anyway, we stick to this one thing, and then we attach ourselves to it, and we're like, well, that was my best beforehand, so why can't I do that again? Here's one thing I wanted to ask you guys. I wrote this down, and I wanted to hear this before I got to the part about breaking the agreements. What was your biggest takeaway of the book? Like, if you were to give it your elevator speech of like, this is really what I got out of it, what was your guys's, I mean, if you care to share, what was your biggest takeaway from this book?
So yeah, I had a couple. It's
Okay.
hard to say which one was. Basically, I think I try way too hard, and I'm constantly reminded when I pause, and reading a book like this just pointed out a couple of ways that I'm still trying too hard. Not necessarily trying to get first place in yoga, although I guess it could look like that from time to time, but you know, like the doing the best, I tend to like, it's never like, when is it the best, you know, and having, I guess, some way to really feel at ease with what I feel my best is kind of my constant work. So the biggest takeaway for me was that if you do your best, I guess it's like strengthening all of the other agreements, and that we're here to live and to be happy and love. And there was a part in under the fourth agreement section that talked about if you like can do your best in 2 hours of meditation, then you can find transcendence.
Oh yeah.
You know, so stop reaching for the like, how long will it take me to find, like, what do I have to do? Like, is it 8 hours a day? Is it 10 hours a day? Like, no, like if you do your best and you really are meeting yourself there in that place, then I mean, the time is arbitrary, right? Like the point isn't so much the achievement or accomplishment or whatever you're putting on yourself that is meaningless. It's actually just being alive and happy and loving, you know? So I guess that was probably the biggest takeaway for me. There were a couple of others, but I'll give somebody else a chance.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. Josh, I think I heard you starting to speak.
Sure. Yeah, well, that was really great, Robin. And as someone who has a pretty clear idea of what perfection should look like, yeah, that was a big one. But another one that was really big for me was, with not taking anything personally, was not taking the positive stuff too personally too, like other people's positive judgments, the ego stroking and stuff. And you know, and it reminds me a lot of yogic principles, and some of the kleshas around, you know, letting over identifying with the ego and kind of clinging a little bit, getting attached to you know, as needing that kind of trophy kind of situation. And certainly it's not something I struggle with terribly, but it's really cool to like see how people are giving praise to each other and find out a way to deliver it that would be connecting, and at the same time like not pushing people I love into this place where their ego is getting might get attached.
I like that. I completely forgot about the positive part of it. Anybody else? Biggest takeaways?
I think a lot with the portion of it about caring about, you know, like what it is that people think or say or judge. I mean, especially within like, you know, social media and yoga in itself and what it's becoming, and what it's really not, and what you don't see behind closed doors, and what it takes to get to, to where anybody is. They don't see the battle or the story. They just see the beginning and the end.
Yeah.
And I think too often maybe I used to care, and I think I'm slowly maybe getting to a point where I'm like, not caring actually makes me a whole lot happier than the, approval from anyone who would be judgmental of me anyway. Like, what do I need that for? You know?
Right. What is it? How's it serving you?
It's not,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Okay. I love that. Thank you. All right. The last part that I was going to say for you guys was, this is my question. We get to the point where we talk about being spiritual warriors, and he says, Ruiz says, he's like, spiritual warriors is one who controls his emotions instead of the other way around. As for most people, what do you do currently in your life to try the practice of being a spiritual warrior?
I mean, meditation.
Yeah.
It comes and it goes as a practice, and lately it's been in for me, and I'm been really grateful for it lately, as I am really getting in tune with how it lets me get above the momentary emotions, and it's simply bringing that in, who our teachers, like our as you would say, like our partners, our parents, our bosses, our children, and coming up with a timeout or a time in, where you can go and, like, from a loving place, take a moment, 5 minutes, 10 minutes to just get back to your breath and meet each other from your quote, like, or let's say highest self. Maybe best self is a little strong, but
sure.
Yeah. So that's one way. And then yoga, which, gives you that self-awareness. You get like an embodiment. You can start to notice your heart rate. You can start to notice your fingers might be tingling, stuff like that. I attribute yoga to an asana a lot for that.
That sense of awareness.
I think going off a lot of what Josh said, and then I think just adding the element of making sure that you realize you deserve that time.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of times for me, I'm literally running from one place to the next quickly. And then when I do take a break for myself, whether it's 5 minutes or an hour, I feel, a tad selfish, like, damn, I should be doing this, or I should be cleaning this, or I should be washing this, or studying this, or writing this. And instead I'm like, nope, it's okay. You deserve this time. And I think it comes down to being able to accept that you deserve that time.
I agree with not agree, but I'm on the same page with everyone else and with Josh. If I take the time in the morning to kind of do the meditation and hopefully do the yoga, then I'm on the space to kind of be that spiritual warrior and kind of stay, kind of contain myself through the day. And if I miss those practices, then I can get all spread out all over the place and into everyone else's opinion and making my own opinions. So if I center in the mornings, it's really helpful.
It's so simple, and yet we forget to use these things. I mean, well, we can forget rather to use these things to keep that practice going. To keep that veil away from the face and not let it just get over and over again. And this is like when I always think about like how we integrate this, whether it's this book or whatever, or yoga practice, like it's nice to remember, and it's nice for us to all hear and recognize that we're at the end of the day still human. And so it is a practice every single day, every single moment of the day. It's a practice. And there's not this, for me, it makes sense to remind myself of that and take the pressure off. That way I don't have to be like, well, shit, I didn't do this today, or, I'm getting attached, or I'm worried about an assumption, or, all these other things. Cause that almost like without that pressure taken off, it's almost makes the task impossible. It almost makes that self-reflection impossible. So, but at the same time, you can't just be like, oh, whatever, I'm human, it's fine. I'm just gonna let it pass. It's when you're being honest to yourself, and when you're being not honest with yourself about it.
Yeah, that fine line.
Yeah. There's one last part, and then I'll leave you guys with this: the reminders that he said that you can create your heaven on earth, and it's this imagining a life, living without a life without fear of being judged by others, with nothing to control and nobody that controls you either, without being afraid to take a risk, with no fear of death, but loving everything around you. And his reasoning why was just straight up because you can. And I thought that was just like, it was so small and so simple, but also profound. It's something that we know, but it really, it is our decision. There are some layers that we peel back. There is that reprogramming that we didn't really get into, because that's a whole other topic in itself, but it is our choice, just in the same way that we choose the way that we practice, and that the way that we show up for the practice. And that sometimes means that you're on your mat, doing handstands and whatever else it is for, 7 hours a day. And sometimes that means you're reading sacred text. Other times that means you're, studying with a teacher. And other time it means you're sitting in meditation, days on end or whatever it is. But there's refuge in knowing that we do have it. And it is in our hands if we choose to use that. So that's all I got for you guys. Any last final closing thoughts from anybody?
This has been great. Thanks so
been.
much.
I love this.
Good.
I love the accountability to finish a book.
I'll if I'm being completely honest with you guys, it was totally selfish. I was just like, I'm going to do a book a year and or a book a month. And then I was like, well, if I'm going to do this, like, why don't, I'm sure there's other people that want to do this too. And
Book club.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I just wanted to say thank you guys so much for believing in this crazy idea and hanging out and taking your Saturday afternoon and just chatting with me today and letting me pick your guys' brains. And
awesome. This has been fun.
Thank you so much for hosting.
Thank you.
Thank you, Danny.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Ciao, everybody.